Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Claire and Kyle's worst blow-up to date, Sharon and Nick's doomed trip. Claire Newman and Kyle Abbott might be on the verge of their most disastrous confrontation to yet, while Sharon Newman and Nick Newman will get ready for a fateful journey. First, given that Kyle consistently seems to find himself in Audra Charles's orbit, Claire will keep looking for excuses to distance herself from him. Claire will be lured to Holden Novak and the flirtatious new future he represents because she is tempted to seek more love encounters. Claire and Kyle might get into a heated argument, which would offer her another strong shove in Holden's way. Holden's potential to harm Claire in the end is a concern for Victoria Newman. Given Holden's dubious past with Audra, Nate Hastings might acknowledge that there are valid grounds for concern. When Victoria hears certain warning signs, she could believe Claire will regret ending her connection with Kyle. Claire might not be able to shake Holden's presence, nevertheless, for some time to come. Given that Victoria and Claire will eventually end up in Los Angeles, Claire might ultimately choose to accompany Holden, as long as her mother does. But perhaps, with her anxieties mounting, Victoria could pursue Claire and Holden. Next, Nikki Newman and Diane Jenkins Abbott may be concerned about Victor Newman's and Jack Abbott's perilous relationship, but they might also agree that it's preferable to their spouses fighting. However, if Jack and Victor turn against one another later on, which YNR spoilers suggest they would, their attempts to defeat Kane Ashby may cause problems. Meanwhile, Jason Thompson's character Billy Abbott can follow his own vindictive whims and end up creating additional issues for himself. In the upcoming episodes, Kane will have to repel several attacks, but he will probably prepare a retaliatory attack. There will be some surprises at the hotel as a result of Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti Jr. looking into the crime committed by Mariah Copeland. There might be hints to help Daniel and Tessa piece the puzzle together because Mariah covered that stranger's face with a pillow in an attempt to smother him. As they look for answers, could Tessa and Daniel go too far in their passion? They'll prepare for their next trip to Los Angeles over with Sharon and Nick. Noah Newman has a project development meeting in Los Angeles in October, so Nick and Sharon will catch up with him then. Regretfully, the encounter might not be as it looks. Although all indications suggest that this is a risky trap, Noah believes there is some interest in starting another club branch. Victoria's worry, Kyle's worst nightmare, and Sharon's tricky journey. Nick Newman and Sharon Newman travel to confront difficulties. In the meantime, Claire Grace Newman and Kyle Abbott might get worse. Let's discuss the upcoming events in the CBS soap opera as you continue reading. First, let's talk about Claire, who needs space and separation from Kyle. But the dude simply won't give up. Additionally, Claire continues to observe or hear about the encounters between Kyle and Audra Charles. Audra and Kyle are behaving like infants, really. It appears that Claire wants to see what else is available to her. Holden Novak gives the blonde a chance to tour Los Angeles. Claire might accept Holden's offer in spite of Kyle's cautions about the man. Despite her strong support for Claire's choices, Victoria Newman may be concerned about her daughter. Victoria is certain that Kyle has feelings for Claire. She may also be concerned that Holden is exploiting Claire and Kyle's predicament. Victoria's worries regarding Holden may be shared by Nate Hastings. Victoria and Claire are in Los Angeles together at some point in the near future. Perhaps Claire consents to the trip in exchange for her mother's ability to accompany her. Or perhaps Victoria discovers some concerning information about Holden and starts pursuing Claire? According to spoilers for the week of September 29th on The Young and the Restless, Jack Abbott and Victor Newman ought to form an alliance. But will they be able to hold off on fighting one another long enough to stop Billy Flynn's character, Kane Ashby? Jason Thompson's character Billy Abbott is probably going to lose it. He is furious because no one wants to assist him in his pursuit of Kane after tricking everyone. Why? The next time a better offer comes up, he can lie and dump them again, right? Additionally, Tessa Porter has made the decision to look into the secret of Mariah Copeland. But Tessa won't have to do the research by herself. Michael Graziadei's character Daniel Romalotti, Jr. has acknowledged that she isn't working alone on this. Additionally, Sharon and Nick intend to travel to Los Angeles. Next month, they will meet Noah Newman. But keep an eye out since there might be some twists and difficulties. The storm clouds gathering over Genoa City were darker than ever, and while the Newman and Abbott families had survived decades of betrayals, rivalries, and bitter feuds, nothing could have prepared them for the explosive fallout that was about to unfold as Claire Newman and Kyle Abbott hurtled toward their worst blow-up to date. A confrontation so combustible that it could not only shatter their fragile relationship but also send shockwaves through both their families, even as Sharon Newman and Nick Newman prepared for what would be a doomed and fateful trip to Los Angeles, one that seemed innocent on the surface, just a chance to catch up with Noah Newman and look into his newest project, but that would ultimately unravel into something far more sinister, dangerous, and heartbreaking, proving once again that in Genoa City, no trip is ever just a trip, and no love is ever without consequence. Claire, still struggling with her identity after months of turmoil and betrayal, had found herself caught in an emotional tug-of-war between her desire for stability with Kyle and the alluring, reckless temptation embodied by Holden Novak, a man with a smile that promised excitement but a history that screamed danger. Kyle, for his part, was fighting his own battles, torn between his need to prove himself outside of his father Jack Abbott's shadow and his all-too-frequent lapses into Audra Charles's orbit, a gravitational pull that Claire could no longer ignore, no matter how hard she tried to convince herself that Kyle's loyalty belonged to her. Every whispered sighting of Kyle and Audra together, every rumor of another late-night encounter, chipped away at Claire's patience until her composure cracked like glass under pressure, leaving her vulnerable not only to Holden's advances but also to the gnawing fear that she might be repeating the same self-destructive patterns that had haunted her family for generations. Victoria Newman, watching her daughter drift closer to Holden despite all the red flags, felt her maternal instinct screaming that Claire was on the verge of disaster, but Victoria herself was so entangled in her own battles, with Nate Hastings' warnings, with Victor Newman's empire, and with the constant Newman-Abbott rivalries, that she could not fully protect her daughter from the choices Claire seemed determined to make. Nate, perceptive as ever, quietly reminded Victoria that Holden's history with Audra was no coincidence, that men like him always circled women like Claire when they sensed vulnerability, and that if Claire didn't see the danger soon, it might be too late. Still, Claire seemed unable to resist Holden's promises of freedom and adventure, particularly when he dangled the possibility of a new life in Los Angeles in front of her, a city where she could escape Kyle's jealous demands and Audra's smirking interference. And so the stage was set for the blow-up, Claire and Kyle standing face to face in the Abbott mansion, the air thick with accusations, heartbreak, and unresolved longing, as Kyle begged her to see reason and Claire, with tears burning in her eyes, accused him of betraying her with Audra one too many times. Their voices rose, their words cut deep, and though neither wanted to admit it, both knew that this was not just another fight, this was the fight, the one that would define the future of their relationship, the one that would push Claire straight into Holden's arms and leave Kyle questioning whether he had lost not only the woman he loved but also the respect of his family, who had watched him repeat mistake after mistake. Meanwhile, across town, Sharon and Nick were packing their bags for Los Angeles, blissfully unaware that their trip, which was supposed to be a simple family visit and a business check-in with Noah, was being set up as a trap by forces they couldn't yet see. Noah, convinced that investors were interested in expanding his club concept, had sent word for his parents to join him, but Victor Newman, always one step ahead, suspected there was more to the invitation than met the eye, muttering to Nicky that in their world, opportunity was often just another word for ambush. Nicky, already on edge from watching Victor and Jack Abbott form an uneasy alliance against Kane Ashby, feared that Sharon and Nick were walking straight into danger, but Sharon, ever the optimist, brushed off the warnings, telling herself that after everything she had endured, from cancer battles to tragic losses, this trip was nothing more than a chance to support her son. Yet Nick couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in his gut that something was wrong, that Noah's project was not as solid as it appeared, and that their reunion might reveal secrets capable of tearing the Newman family apart all over again. As if that weren't enough chaos, Jack and Victor's alliance, fragile at best, threatened to collapse before it even took root, with Diane Jenkins Abbott and Nicky Newman nervously admitting that while their husband's partnership might serve a temporary purpose in taking down Kane Ashby, It was only a matter of time before the old rivalries resurfaced and turned them against one another once again. Billy Abbott, volatile and restless, only added fuel to the fire, his vendetta against Cain consuming him to the point where he no longer cared about collateral damage, even if it meant alienating Jill or leaving Lily shaking her head in disbelief at his self-destruction. Cain, far from intimidated, was preparing his own counterattack, biding his time and waiting for the right moment to strike back, determined to prove that he was no one's victim. Back in Genoa City, Tessa Porter and Daniel Romalotti Jr. were digging deeper into Mariah Copeland's secret, unraveling the threads of a crime that Mariah herself had desperately tried to cover up. The image of Mariah smothering a stranger with a pillow haunted Tessa, not because she believed her wife was inherently cruel but because she feared the act was tied to something bigger, darker, and more dangerous than either of them realized. Daniel, caught up in the mystery, couldn't help but feel his old protective instincts flare to life, and as he and Tessa grew closer in their search for answers, the question began to hang in the air. Would their passion for the truth, and perhaps for each other, go too far? The investigation led them to the same hotel where Sharon and Nick were scheduled to stay in Los Angeles, and as the puzzle pieces began to align, it became clear that none of these storylines were separate, they were threads in the same web, weaving together a picture of betrayal, danger, and heartbreak that would catch every single one of them in its snare. By the time Sharon and Nick landed in Los Angeles, the trap was already in place, though neither of them knew it. Noah, eager to impress, was blind to the warning signs, and Claire, having followed Holden westward with Victoria reluctantly in tow, was standing on the edge of her own disaster, her heart torn between the reckless thrill of a man who promised her the world and the steady, flawed love of the man she had just walked away from. Kyle, left behind in Genoa City, felt the weight of his choices pressing down on him, the silence of the Abbott mansion a reminder of what he had lost, while Audra, smirking in the shadows, whispered to herself that she had gotten exactly what she wanted. The worst blow-up between Claire and Kyle had left both scarred, Sharon and Nick's doomed trip was just beginning, and Genoa City was bracing for the fallout that no one, not Victor, not Jack, not Victoria, not Diane, would be able to stop once it hit. The fallout from Claire and Kyle's explosive confrontation continued to ripple like aftershocks through Genoa City, each word they had flung at each other reverberating in the silence that followed, neither one willing to admit how deeply it had cut, but both feeling as if they had been ripped open in front of the entire world, and though Claire stormed out with her chest heaving, cheeks wet from tears she would never admit to, Kyle stood frozen, gripping the edge of the Abbott mantle until his knuckles turned white, as if holding on to the wood could somehow anchor him to a life that was slipping out of his grasp, his mind racing with questions of how it had all gone so wrong, and whether Audra Charles's smug, knowing smile had been the poison in the well all along or whether he himself had been the architect of his own destruction by not knowing when to draw a line and prove his loyalty to Claire. Claire, meanwhile, practically ran into Holden Novak's arms, not because she was in love with him, she wasn't, not yet, but because he represented escape, freedom, and a world where she wasn't constantly competing with ghosts of Kyle's past or whispers about his flirtations with Audra, and as Holden draped his arm over her shoulders with the kind of confidence only a man who thrived on risk could manage, Claire felt both the exhilaration of possibility and the faintest prickle of dread, a whisper in the back of her mind that told her Holden was danger dressed as desire. Victoria, who had been shadowing her daughter's choices with the wary eye of a mother who had once made too many mistakes of her own, saw the shift in Claire and knew that Holden's presence was more than just a casual flirtation, this was a crossroads, and if Claire chose wrong, it could derail everything she had been building since arriving in Genoa City. Nate Hastings, who had grown closer to Victoria again after offering her his measured counsel, reminded her that Holden's entanglements with Audra were not just coincidence. The man moved like a predator circling prey, and if Claire believed she was immune, she was only fooling herself. But Claire, bristling under the constant watchfulness of her mother, dug her heels in further, insisting that Kyle had betrayed her one too many times and that Holden was simply someone who saw her for who she really was, not as Victor Newman's granddaughter, not as Victoria's daughter, not as Kyle's girlfriend, but as Claire Grace Newman, a woman trying to define herself on her own terms. And so, when Holden suggested she come with him to Los Angeles, a city where reinvention was the currency of survival, Claire agreed, with the caveat that Victoria could accompany her, an attempt to appease her mother even as she secretly longed for the thrill of being swept away into Holden's fast-moving orbit. At the same time, Sharon and Nick were already mid-flight to Los Angeles, unaware that their trip had been carefully baited and set like a trap, their anticipation of seeing Noah clouding the warning signs that Victor and Nikki had tried to impress upon them. Sharon, who carried the quiet hope that this reunion would give her family something stable to hold on to, sat by the window of the plane, gazing out at the clouds and remembering the countless times she had reinvented herself, always clawing her way back from heartbreak or chaos, always surviving, yet never quite free of the Newman legacy that seemed to weave its way into every corner of her life. Nick, sitting beside her, shifted restlessly, his instincts honed from decades of business and family battles, muttering that something about this entire setup didn't sit right, that Noah's project had seemed rushed, too convenient, and that their son's excitement might be blinding him to ulterior motives. Sharon squeezed his hand and told him not to worry, that this was simply a chance to support Noah, but Nick's jaw tightened as he resolved silently to keep his eyes open and be ready for whatever was coming, because if there was one thing life as a Newman had taught him, it was that the rug could be pulled out from under you at any moment. Back in Genoa City, Jack Abbott and Victor Newman were circling each other like wary wolves, their temporary truce holding for now but threatening to unravel with every passing hour, especially as Billy Abbott grew more unhinged in his quest to take down Kane Ashby, lashing out at anyone who suggested he slow down or reconsider, his eyes wild with the kind of desperation that only comes from a man who feels he has been underestimated for too long. Diane Jenkins Abbott watched her husband's alliance with Victor with increasing anxiety, confiding to Nikki that while it might be useful in the short term, the rivalry between their men was too deeply rooted in ego and history to hold, and that when it inevitably blew apart, the collateral damage would be catastrophic. Nikki, for once, found herself in rare agreement with Diane, admitting that she too feared what would happen when Victor and Jack turned on each other again, especially with Kane, a man as sly as he was resilient, preparing his counterattack in the shadows. Kane, tired of being painted as the perpetual villain, was quietly setting traps of his own, determined to prove that underestimating him would be everyone's greatest mistake, and while the Newman and Abbott powerhouses played their chess game, Kane was ready to flip the board. As all of this unfolded, Tessa Porter and Daniel Romolotti Jr. were digging deeper into Mariah Copeland's secret, their investigation into the smothering incident leading them into increasingly dangerous territory, their late-night meetings charged with a tension that neither of them wanted to name but both could feel. Tessa, devoted to Mariah yet terrified of what they might uncover, found herself leaning on Daniel in ways that blurred the lines of friendship, while Daniel, struggling with his own complicated past, felt a pull toward Tessa that was both comforting and unsettling, and as they pored over hotel records, security footage, and whispered rumors, it became clear that the truth they were chasing was connected not just to Mariah but to the very hotel where Sharon and Nick were headed, as if fate were conspiring to bring all these tangled threads together in one dangerous convergence. By the time Sharon and Nick arrived in Los Angeles, the trap was already closing in. Noah, wide-eyed and enthusiastic, greeted them with the fervor of a man convinced he was on the brink of a breakthrough, explaining his plans for a new club branch with the kind of passion that made Sharon's heart swell with maternal pride. But Nick, ever the skeptic, pressed for details: who were the investors, what guarantees were there, why had everything moved so quickly, and the evasive answers only confirmed his suspicions that something darker was lurking beneath the surface. Sharon tried to smooth things over, reminding Nick that this was Noah's dream, but even she felt a faint chill when she noticed the way one of the supposed investors lingered too long on their conversation, his eyes sharp and calculating. It was then that Sharon realized Victor's warning might not have been paranoia, it might have been prophecy. Meanwhile, Claire and Victoria landed in Los Angeles as well, following Holden's lead into a glittering world of rooftop bars, exclusive parties, and whispered promises of opportunities that sounded too good to be true. Holden played the role of charming guide flawlessly, showering Claire with attention and presenting her to potential allies as if she were the star of his story, but Victoria's instincts screamed that every smile was rehearsed, every gesture calculated, and that Holden was not a man to be trusted with her daughter's fragile heart. Still, Claire, desperate to believe in something new, clung to Holden's promises, even as the echoes of her fight with Kyle haunted her. In quiet moments, she could still hear Kyle's voice, hoarse with anger and pain, begging her not to throw away what they had, and though she told herself she was finished with him, the tears that came unbidden in the dark of night told a different story. Back home, Kyle was unraveling, his worst fears realized as he replayed the blow-up over and over, each memory twisting like a knife in his chest. He lashed out at Audra, accusing her of manipulating him, of driving a wedge between him and Claire, but Audra only laughed, her voice dripping with satisfaction as she told him that he had done this to himself, that Claire had left because she finally saw him for who he really was. Kyle's anger boiled over, but beneath the rage was fear that Audra was right, fear that he had lost Claire for good, and fear that when she returned from Los Angeles, she would no longer be his to fight for. As night fell over Los Angeles, the worlds of the Newmans and Abbotts collided in ways none of them had expected. Sharon and Nick, realizing too late that Noah's project was nothing but bait, found themselves cornered in a hotel lounge by men who had no interest in clubs or investments but plenty of interest in leveraging the Newman name for power. At the same time, Claire, dazzled and disoriented by Holden's world, stumbled into the same orbit, her path crossing with Sharon and Nick's in a moment that was anything but coincidence. The air was thick with danger, the kind that came not from random accidents but from carefully laid plans, and as the pieces began to click into place, it became clear that this trip was not just doomed, it was deadly. And back in Genoa City, Victor and Jack both felt the shift, as if the universe itself was warning them that their children and grandchildren were walking into a storm, but neither man, for all their wealth and power, could stop what was coming. The worst blow-up between Claire and Kyle had been just the beginning. Sharon and Nick's doomed journey was spiraling into peril, and Genoa City was about to face consequences that would stretch from the glittering lights of Los Angeles back to the quiet corners of the Midwest, proving once again that in the world of the young and the restless, no secret stays buried, no trip is ever safe, and no love survives unscathed.